three different numbers today. I want to talk about 50, 11, and 0. It has been 50 years since the Santa Barbara oil spill. Actually, I don't like calling it the Santa Barbara oil spill because, did you guys spill that oil? No. It sounds like oil just spilled. No, Santa Barbara did not spill the oil. The oil did not spill. Oil gets spilled by fossil fuel corporations who drill. So whose oil spill? It was not Santa Barbara's. It was Union Oil or Unical's. Whose oil spill? Union's oil or Unical's oil spill. It is not Santa Barbara's oil spill. So, it has been 50 years since Unical's massive and grotesque oil spill in Santa Barbara. That is half a century. That's 5 decades. That is a really long time. For some of us, that's basically our lifetime. For some people in this room, that's twice the time they've had on the planet. I just met a bunch of kids upstairs. It's about 10 times the time that they've had on this planet. It's a really, really long time. There are a few markers in U.S. history that are commonly attributed with triggering the modern environmental movement. There was Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. There was Love Canal. There was the United Church of Christ's report on toxic waste and race. And there was Unical's massive oil spill in Santa Barbara. All of those movements helped kick off all of those events helped kick off an incredible movement that has accomplished so much in 50 years. 50 years is a good time to pause and commemorate. So the oil spill was in 59. That decade, in 69, that decade, EPA was founded, the first Earth Day, DDT was banned, critical laws were passed, the Clean Water Act, the Marine Protection Research and Sanctuaries Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Toxic Substance Control Act. All of those were accomplished in the decade after the oil spill. In the next decade, in the 1980s, progress continued. Superfund was launched. The International Whaling Commission adopted a moratorium on commercial whaling. The Montreal Protocol was created to protect the ozone layer. The US began phasing out asbestos, and the Basel Convention to stop rich countries from dumping hazardous waste on poor countries were created. That was great in the 80s. In the 90s, things slowed down a little bit, but still we made some progress. Lead was banned from gasoline. The Convention on Biological Diversity went into effect. Gray wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone. Since 2000, things have slowed down a little more, which is frustrating because the scientific knowledge about the need for these protections are greater than ever. But still, since the 2000s, California passed an aggressive renewable portfolio standard to stimulate clean energy. The plastic microbeads in personal care products have been banned. Clean energy, renewable energy is booming, and the Paris Climate Accord was adopted. That is a lot of really, really good stuff. And those victories didn't just happen spontaneously. There's an oil spill and then all those things happened. In the period following Unical's oil spill in Santa Barbara, civic environmental activism exploded. It just blossomed. My organization, Greenpeace, which is now in over 50 countries, was founded 2 years after the oil spill. Locally, 4 powerhouses of environmental activism grew out of the aftermath of that disaster. Powerhouses that continue crucial work that we've heard about tonight. The powerhouses that are sponsoring this event and deserve our support. They are Get Oil Out, GOO, which should also be your baby's first and most important environmental slogan. Environmental Defense Center, Community Environmental Council, and UCSB's Environmental Studies program. So give them another hand. That is what effective resistance looks like. If you are lucky enough to live here in this coastal paradise, find those groups, sign up, become a member, make a donation, get involved. Share your time and your treasure with these organizations because that is how we build a better future. So looking back over those 50 years since the oil spill disaster, I can say without hesitation that the world is a better place because of the movement that oil spill helped trigger. So thank you, all of you, for being part of that movement. But at the same time, if we are honest, we don't just look back and celebrate. We also think about what we have learned and we look forward. And if we are honest, we have to admit that while we have accomplished much, that on a whole bunch of fronts, from climate change to species loss to environmental justice, we are not winning fast enough. And as Bill McKibben says, when it comes to climate, winning slowly is the same as losing. We are the first generations to live firsthand the real impacts of climate change, and we are the last generation with a window to turn things around, and that window is closing. So while we accomplished much in the last 50 years, if we do the same thing in the next 50 years, we're toast. It's game over. It's just not enough. I read a book recently. The book is not that good, but the title is good, so you just need to know the title. I got it because the title, don't get it. But the title is excellent. The title is, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And I was really struck by that title, and I thought that is a message for the environmental movement. You know, we environmentalists, we are such an earnest bunch. For 50 years, we have made our case for pollution prevention and conserving resources and clean energy. We have done our research and we have issued reports, and when those reports were ignored, we issued them again in color with 3D charts, and we wrote op-eds and we enrolled cultural influencers, and we did beach cleanups and wrote songs and made videos, and we did recycled art projects made from plastic that we pulled from the sea. We hung banners on bridges and buildings, and we chained ourselves to oil platforms, and we held gigantic marches. We showed up so earnestly because we knew the science. We told everyone who would listen that we must stop trashing the planet and figure out a way to live sustainably and justly on this one beautiful planet that we have. And that's more true than ever. We must figure that out. But for too long, too many of us in the environmental movement have been trapped in the myth that the truth will set us free. And the reason I say that's a myth is because we have so much truth about the connection between fossil fuels and climate change, and we are not free. We are still 50 years later fighting new proposals for new drilling, new ports, new permits, new pipelines, and new platforms. At this point, we as a movement have every single thing we need to figure out how to live in a more sustainable and just way. We have everything but one thing. We have the science, we have the economic arguments, the case studies, the model policies, the innovative technologies, we have the common sense. We have everything we need except the power to make it so. And that power comes from millions and millions of engaged people taking action and demanding change that is commensurate with the scale of the problem. Not demanding incremental little tweaks, but demanding the kind of bold, courageous action that the moment calls for. When I listed all of those laws that were passed in the 1970s, that was right after the first Earth Day. I don't know if you know how many people participated in the first Earth Day. 20 million people participated in the first Earth Day. Our giant climate march in New York a few years ago, we had 400,000. They had 20 million people participate in the first Earth Day, and they didn't even have Twitter or smartphones. If they could get 20 million people where you had to stand in your living room and talk on a cord to talk on the phone, we can damn well get 20 million people out there today. And that is what we have to do. We have to build a robust, vibrant, inclusive, courageous movement. We have to join groups. We have to recruit people. We have to build our power. We have to build a movement that welcomes parents and students and scientists and artists and electeds and business allies and everybody who is ready to hold responsible the corporations that continue to drill and pump and pipe and burn fossil fuels, and ready to hold responsible those elected officials who permit. They literally permit, they give permission to fossil fuel companies to pollute our environment and our bodies and threaten our collective future. So that is the number 50. What got us here won't get us there. The next number I want to talk about is 11. Last fall, the IPCC, which is the premier group of climate scientists around the world from almost 100 countries, issued a terrifying new report where they said that we have 12 years to transition off fossil fuels to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. Now it's down to 11. We have 11 years. We don't have to be totally off fossil fuels in 11 years, but we have to aggressively, ambitiously, at an unprecedented level, embrace that transition. We need to reduce greenhouse gases by about half by 2030 and by 100% by 2050. So we have a problem. We use too much fossil fuels, and we need to reduce it fast at an unprecedented scale. So let me ask you, when you find yourself in a hole, what is the first thing you do?
Stop digging.
Stop digging. In this case, literally, stop digging. The last thing that we should be doing right now is investing in new fossil fuel infrastructure. So we need to stand together as we are doing here today. But when we leave this door, we need to recruit our neighbors, our parents, our friends, our coworkers, every single person that we can recruit. We need to stand together and demand an end to new fossil fuels. So if we can do that, the reason we're focusing on the new fossil fuels is because stopping the new fossil fuel avoids a lock-in on continued carbon production so that it buys us time. It expands the window of time we have to push those regulatory and market changes that are already happening. And they are happening. My God, the solutions are so exciting. Renewable energy development is thriving. There are way more jobs now in energy efficiency and renewable clean energy, much, much more than in fossil fuels. We can cling onto an obsolete energy system that literally threatens the planet, or we can embrace innovation and ensure that that transition is a just one for workers and communities. And that is what I know that our country is. At this late stage in the game, when we have 11 years left, trying to force new fossil fuel permits, pipelines, and platforms, rather than embracing a just transition to clean and renewable energy, is the mother of lose-lose scenarios when we could have a win-win, and we won't take it anymore. The best time to embrace that transition would have been 50 years ago. The next best time is today. Tomorrow is too late. We have 11 years. And that brings me to the final number I want to talk about, which is 0. 0 is how many new fossil fuel projects the climate can sustain. Now, I know some companies have a hard time understanding 0. Like, I have a Subaru, and on the back of my Subaru, it says partial zero emissions vehicle. You can't have partial 0. 0 is 0. When it comes to oil and gas wells, whether you're onshore or off, whether you're in Cat Canyon or coastal lands, 0 is another word for not one more. So here's the deal. These scientists from all over the world have determined that to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, we have to keep the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. You know, it's interesting, scientists are no longer debating whether or not climate change is real or not. They're debating about whether the impacts are going to be existential or catastrophic. I never thought I'd be in the camp of saying, let's choose catastrophe, but that's actually a lot better than some of the worst case scenarios. So at this point, the ideal scenarios that we had 50 years ago during the oil spill, those are no longer options on the table. We are really in harm reduction mode. So the catch is, we can't go above 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature increase. The catch is that existing fossil fuel facilities, the ones that are already operating, if we keep operating those, we go over the 1.5. So there is no wiggle room for one more bit of fossil fuel expansion. We need to make sure that those companies trying to develop Cat Canyon, those companies that want to drill offshore, we need to make sure they realize there is no room for one more. We have to stand together and say no. So how do we do that? There are so many ways to do that. This is one of the great things about such an all-pervasive problem, is that there's so many ways that we can get involved. You don't even have to do something boring, because we have a no fossil fuel opportunity for everybody. We can join those that are fighting the disastrous plan to build 760 new wells in Cat Canyon. 760 is 760 more than 0. None. We're not going to have 760 wells in Cat Canyon. We're going to have 0 new wells in Cat Canyon. trying to promote this disastrous, really at this point, criminal plan. I was reading an interview in one of the local press about them, and this one guy said, well, don't worry, it'll operate safely and the oil won't spill. As though that solves the problem, because the oil not spilling and getting to market and getting burned is the problem. Like, dude, that does not help that it's not going to spill and you're going to burn it. The oil needs to stay in the ground. So that's one thing, is we must hold the line at Cat Canyon. Let's make that an iconic, emblematic test for our movement. No more permits. We can also join the campaign that stopped the power plant in Oxnard that David talked about earlier, and we can keep working to ensure that Oxnard and communities like Oxnard all over this world, which have disproportionately borne the impacts of our fossil fuel dirty economy, we need to make sure that those communities are at the forefront of making sure that the transition to clean energy is a just transition for workers and for communities. We can say not one more to offshore oil drilling in both California and federal waters. You know, a lot of California politicians like to say no offshore drilling in federal waters. What about California waters too? It all has to be off limits. Now, Shell and Exxon and Trump are salivating and opening up more of California's coastlines to more drilling. Not one more. If you want to join a protest about that, there's one tomorrow, 10 a.m. at the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management's Pacific Regional Office. The address is 760 Paseo Camarillo. Is that how you say it? Camarillo, 10 o'clock tomorrow. Be there and tell BOEM not one more offshore oil drilling. Demand that our candidates and elected officials be real climate leaders. We have a lot of candidates and electeds here in California that love to talk about climate, but they're still taking money from fossil fuel companies and they're still catering to their needs. And we need real climate leaders. California is now an early primary state for the presidential election, which really changes the game here. That means that presidential candidates are going to be in California soon. One just launched today in Oakland. They're going to be here trying to raise awareness, make a name for themselves, and court our support. So this is an important moment for us in California. We need to let them know that we only support real climate leaders, and real climate leaders don't drill. Real climate leaders don't take money from fossil fuel companies, because then they're going to be beholden to their owners, donors. Real climate leaders support the Green New Deal. Real climate leaders commit to no new fossil fuel infrastructure. If any candidate cannot commit to those things, they don't get our vote. And if any elected office holder does not commit those things, then they have proven themselves incapable to be the kind of leader we need. They are failing at their job. The nice thing that we can do is help them exit and find a different job. We must make people pay if they will not lead. And I hope if any Board of Supervisors are in here listening, that applies to the Cat Canyon project too. You need to be a leader. You deny those permits and get out of the way. Because Santa Barbara is coming. Greenpeace has made our top priority on the climate front promoting this idea of no new fossil fuels and holding that as a litmus test for every candidate. If you want to join our campaign, please do. Text the words "no fossil fuels" to 877-877. Text "no fossil fuels" to 877-877, and then that'll sign you up on our rapid response team to say no fossil fuels from Cat Canyon to the coast. But let me tell you that even though the moment is dire and even though that window is closing, I am more full of hope than ever. Because the good news is that we have most people on our side. You know, when I started doing this work 30 years ago, I had to spend a lot of time convincing people that there was a problem. At this point, it is totally clear that there is a problem. Every single person in this country realizes there's a problem unless they work at Fox News or live in the White House. We know that it is a problem. And it turns out that most people really want action. A majority of people in this US now, for the first time, want aggressive action on climate change. It turns out that most people, when they're really looking at the information, most people really do want the Earth's climate to stay in that temperature range in which human beings can keep living. And it turns out that most people really don't want their seafood dinner contaminated with tiny fragments of plastic. And most people don't want their babies born pre-polluted with 165 intestinal chemicals in their blood like is happening today. We are most people. Sometimes we forget about that and we feel like, a marginalized side group. It is not true. We are most people. If you look at the levels of support that we have for climate action, for a sustainable and just future, we have such higher levels of support than the abolitionists had, than the suffragettes had, than the civil rights had. Social movements of the past would have been envious of our numbers of support. What we have to do is take that support and turn it into mass action demanding change. This is our moment. We are at a history-changing, history-making moment, and people from Santa Barbara across this country are riled up and ready to act. The bottom line is we don't have another half century to keep asking politely and lobbying correctly and showing our reports and our science. We don't have that, just hoping that the science will work. This is our moment. Let us seize it, and let us seize it with everything that we have, because what is at stake is everything that we love. Let's go, Santa Barbara.